Welcome to the Mechanical PE Exam Prep Podcast, the podcast where I give mechanical engineers like you the tools and motivation to get your professional engineering license and take your career to the next level. In this episode, Tyler Lloyd shares his honest and inspiring journey to passing the mechanical PE exam after regrouping from a tough first attempt. He opens up about the mindset shifts, study habits, and personal discipline that transformed his second try, including how a parallel physical challenge became the unlikely key to staying motivated. We dive into what changed, how he rebuilt confidence, and the exact strategies that carried him across the finish line. Whether you're on your first attempt or coming back for another round, Tyler's story is the kind of real, practical encouragement every future PE needs. Tyler, welcome to the Mechanical PE Exam Prep Podcast. Congratulations on passing your PE exam.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate it.
So you did the thermal fluids exam, but before we get into the details of that, would you mind just giving a bit of your background, education, professional, what you're working on, and kind of set the scene for what made you want to go for your PE?
Yeah, definitely. So I went to school at Washington State University, got my mechanical engineering degree in 2020. I had originally actually tried to do the bioengineering course, but they had essentially said, they expect you to go through like your PhD level to, get anywhere, post graduation. So I basically essentially a semester into school had switched to mechanical engineering, and then graduated in my 4 years. I had done an internship while I was at WSU. I was a technical sales intern for a chemical treatment company for a couple of summers. Didn't really want to go the sales engineer route, and then started my professional career at a food and beverage manufacturing facility. So I was basically running capital projects for that company at that plant for a couple of years. Switched to their corporate engineering side, and learned a lot. Learned a lot about food and manufacturing. It's kind of a crazy niche world a little bit, but I mean there's a lot going on there. So my fiance then was basically finishing. She needed to finish her degree in Seattle, so made a change in my little bit of change in career path so that I could physically relocate, because the previous job was kind of dependent on being in the area. So got a job with a general contractor that to basically help them with their food and bev projects. So that's what I've been working on, and that's kind of up to this point.
Cool. And did you always know that you wanted to get the PE at some point, or is that something your employer encouraged you to do? Like, how did that come about?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the entire time it was such a personal goal for me. It was never anybody saying, "Hey, this is what I have." And my first boss, for example, didn't have his PE, so he was one of those people that had to approve. In the manufacturing realm, you can approve your. I get the approval from my first boss, even though he didn't have his PE. So he was, and we can talk about that later. But there were several people that had to approve my experience, and one of them didn't have PE. So it's not like I started out with that. There was the mantra that, hey, in 4 years you got to get this done. There was always, just a general discussion, amongst the engineering professionals that I worked with that, hey, this is something that you can do, should do, kind of up to you. And then switching careers to the, kind of general contracting route, definitely not something that is mandatory. It's not something that was ever requested. It was more me just talking about it, that it was a goal of mine. And I mean, it was honestly from through and through, it's kind of just been my own personal, just a personal goal, to do, just to kind of like show that am I an engineer? I want to get it done, So
Right.
so went ahead and tried it.
That's great. Yeah, I think it's something about changing career, not that you changed your career path, but you changed jobs.
Yeah.
And there's something about doing that that gets you to take stock of where you're headed, where you thought you'd be, where you want to go. And it's a major effort to do it. So you kind of have to pick the right time. And I would imagine that you kind of refresh those thoughts at the time that you were moving and everything else,
Yeah.
and deciding that you wanted to get into it at some point. So
Mhm.
what was the timeline on that when you kind of decided to take it on, and
Mhm.
how did you go about it?
Yeah. So about a year ago, I said, I have my job, I got my life, but this is something that, I've been toying with the idea of. And so I went ahead and basically, I was, it took a long time to write up the professional references, documentation of your work because I had transferred from, one employer to another. And like I had mentioned earlier, one of my first, bosses doesn't have his professional engineering license. So I spent a long time making sure that I really documented the work I had done and go through that process. I ended up having three separate people approve my work experience.
Mm.
So I did that about this time last year. And then once I finally got that approved, in the state of Washington, you do have to wait your 4 years, get your approval, do the engineering law exam, and then you take your, obviously take your professional engineering exam. So it was around that time, about a year ago, where I just said, this is the right time in my life to do it. I've, relocated. I have a consistent job, consistent space. Why not go for it? It's just something that I've always really thrived on having like a big ambitious goal in front of me. I know you've talked about your, I think you triathlons, and so like in a similar manner, like having a large physical goal, and something that I wanted to talk about too is like having something that is in parallel with your professional engineering license. That's a separate goal that you're tracking. Something that's physically active, I think, is really helpful. And so that's kind of, I enjoy having a large goal ahead of me, and so I just said, why not? Why not me? And let's just get after it. That was about a year ago.
Nice. What were you doing in parallel, if you don't mind sharing? Did you have
Yeah,
a specific goal too on the side?
yeah. So originally, about a year ago, I had done the 1,000 pound man challenge, where you're doing the bench, squat, and deadlift. That add those up for 1,000 pounds, and then do that within an hour. So that was something that was as I was, relocating essentially. That was like a tangent goal of mine that had sort of propelled, the PE license in general. Since the PE license, something I wanted to bring up was, I've never been a runner. I do not like running, but I've ran more, than I ever have in my life here, and in Seattle,
Hmm.
because, and it was something I wanted to share too. Is my first go around with the PE exam, and kind of how I went about that versus really like taking a different route, and also remembering that, like what I had just mentioned, having a parallel goal, I think, is really helpful. And that's what I did throughout your course, and I was successful using your course.
Yeah, it's funny sometimes from the outside looking in when somebody has big things going on in parallel. It's like, well, how do you do it all? Doesn't that make it harder when you start piling challenges on top of each other?
Mhm.
And that's kind of true, but in a weird way, it's almost complementary because when you are pushing yourself in a couple different directions, obviously it can't be 10 different things, but if it's two or three, then
Yeah,
that can be really helpful because well, exercise just has so many benefits. The way it improves your brain function. So when you're running, you feel better, you think better. There's a kind of clarity that comes out of it, and then you're ready to sit down and focus and study. So there's like a synergy between the two. And I don't do as much lifting, but as what you're describing, but that has its benefits too. And I think there's a huge psychological boost. We're meant to use our bodies, and somehow that feeds the study effort. So that's really cool that you
yeah,
already kind of had that notion and really just doubled your efforts
yeah,
once you got into it.
yeah, 100%. I mean, when you have something that's hard in front of you, there's this hill that's close to my house, and after every run, it's something I always dread. But hey, every time, and when I was doing your course, I would, get up that hill. I swear, it's like a 45-degree angle. But, once I get to the top of that thing, that was hard. You can do hard things. There's my mom's an elementary school teacher. She's got that message in her classroom. You can do hard
Mm,
things, and I
that's
think that,
beautiful.
yeah, I think that, like, doing the much more running. I'm training now for a half marathon. Like I said,
Awesome.
not a runner, but hey, next best thing, right? So, doing hard things consistently, I think, especially during the PE. study process, there's so much stuff that, is difficult. Learning is difficult, and, failing is, I think, such a good thing. I think that, when you fail and you're actively working to, get to a point where you're no longer failing, right? It's such a good, like, relationship. So the running, I think, was my thing this past, 4 months of, or I guess 5 of doing your course. And just that parallel, I guess, synergy, I think, is really something that's helped me, and it's helped me in the past, and it would definitely help, anybody doing this. I would also say, that was one of the things that really drew me to your course. I had originally, I was looking for, ironically, some type of podcast, some type of, who else is out there that's going after this too. I can't be the only person, just, where anybody else out there? And so I found your podcast, and I was traveling a lot for work at the time, but I was about to take my exam for the first time, and I had been listening to your podcast, and I knew that, if it didn't go right the first time, and it unfortunately didn't, but I knew that, the way you spoke about things, and the way that, you had, talked about your mental health, what you're eating, the physical activity, just your podcast and the way you went about things. I just knew that, I needed to trust my gut and go with your course for the TFS program. So yeah, I think that's kind of my story up to, taking the exam and, failing the first time, unfortunately, but what helped me through, a couple weeks ago when I passed.
What do you think was missing the first time? Because I get the sense talking to you that you have a really healthy approach and attitude to things and a kind of humility that's like embedded in your personality where, you don't make it part of your identity. Like you're doing a half marathon, you don't consider yourself a runner. You're okay with that, right? You're just gonna chip away, do the work, build up, and kind of enjoy the roller coaster ride of that. I just get the feeling like you've had that personality trait for a lot longer than you've had the goal of
Mhm.
going for the PE.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
what was missing in the first 6 months of your study process?
When I had done my original course, for whatever reason, I had not. There was such a. It's interesting because there's such a, difference between the way I went about it the first time and the second. The course I had chosen, I was trying to be. So my current employer I had did expense my course for the first time, and I was trying to be frugal. There was a sense of, I want to be respectful of, what they're offering me and what they're providing me. And we can talk about it later as well, but there's no one that I, sit with, in my work office that, is actively going for their PE license. So I was trying to do the course, and for whatever reason, I was scared to, and we had talked about this previously, but scared to lock in the date. I'd never locked in the date. I continued to, go through the course, listen to videos, do practice problems, and I still felt like, I wasn't getting it and grasping it. And then all of a sudden, at the last minute, I was expecting there to be more opportunities in the area to actually land that, a seat, and they basically said, no, we have something that's 3 weeks away or 2 months from now. I was like, well, I'm done with my course. I should hopefully know enough. And I, studied, for another 3 weeks, did a couple practice problems, and or exams, and it didn't go right. I think it was, how I went about the course, was just different. With your course, I paid for your course out of my own pocket. I knew that I was going to do what I needed to do. I had, told too many of my of my family and friends that this was the goal. And like I'd said earlier, I mean, it really is such like a personal thing for me. I'm not getting anything directly, a direct benefit out of my, employer for having the PE license. It was something that I had put in so much time and energy into it the first time. Like I said earlier, I mean, learning is so hard. Going through that first, several months of going through that first course I had tried, man, I forget how long it takes just to get into the study process, the study flow. I mean, I feel differently about it now because it's just almost essentially a year. But, I remember back to a year ago where, man, this is hard. I hadn't studied in a long time. I'm sitting down, essentially most nights and trying to figure this stuff out. What at sometimes felt like for the first time, and so I didn't set the date. I was going about it just in a different manner. And I didn't trust the process I was with. I didn't trust the course, and kind of ultimately didn't really trust myself going into the exam. Like I had mentioned, even coming up to that first try, I had been listening to your podcasts, and I just knew I wanted to try it different route. I trusted your what you had put in your podcast or what you had put online in your YouTube videos that you provide, and I just knew that, hey, I'm just going to trust this course. There was a previous podcast for you that you had done with a couple of guys that had done their TFS program together. Um,
Hmm.
and that was really what sold it for me was I want to try this TFS program with Dan. I unfortunately didn't have the guy sitting next to me the whole time, that's for sure. But
Yeah.
that
And
was,
yeah, and it's nothing against the employer. They're being helpful. They're trying, you have a goal, they want to be supportive. They don't maybe have resources in house to, they're not going to sit down and study with you, but they
mhm,
can throw some money at that problem for you, and they help do that. So I think that's a good gesture.
mhm,
Unfortunately, they don't necessarily know what direction to take that in, and I think
mhm,
for anyone listening, the onus is really on the candidate to say, what do I want to use? Because like it's like if it could be any goal, right? But like if you had 100 people in a room and everybody wanted to lose 10 pounds, and 100 people could do it 100 different ways, it doesn't really matter. I'm one possible avenue to that, and if the content resonates with you, great. But what I find typically is with some of these more kind of corporate options that are more attractive to employers is they have the right marketing, they have the correct appearance of I don't know, like it's a trust feeling, right?
mhm.
But they may not actually have the support, and it may not have the internal connective tissue to actually get you from A to B, because as a candidate, you really just want to get on a conveyor belt that kind of takes you from A to B. Because if you have to figure out what to do and do it, then the whole time that you're supposed to be working, you got this thing in the back of your head that says, am I doing this the right way? Am I doing the right stuff? Is this going to work? And
Mhm.
if you're feeling uncertain and you don't trust it, you actually said, right, you didn't trust the process, you didn't trust yourself, and now you're 3 weeks out and you're like, well, I guess I got to do it because the calendar says so, as
Yeah,
opposed to actually being sure that you're in a state of readiness. So my goal is to just take all of that away and say, don't worry about the process, but you do have to show up and work. I can't do it for you. You have to study. And you were totally willing to do that. And that's why it worked out for you, because you had that energy sort of pent up, and you just needed something to direct it at. And now you run, right? You don't get on and
yeah,
walk, you run.
yeah, absolutely. And my transfer from, figuring out that I failed my first try to starting your course was, I believe, actually 7 days. I gave myself like zero licking my wounds time. Seriously, I knew what I needed to do. I had come out of the exam like, I kind of doubt that I'm going to pass because I felt like all the verbiage and the wording was so, PE exam's hard, very practical problems, and I was overwhelmed, the first time, but I knew what I wanted to do, and man, I just stuck with my gut. Basically, a week later, was starting your course, went through your first module. I forget what it's called, but almost immediately, started into your practice problems, and immediately I just knew that, even working through just the first, couple of problems, I knew that the quality and the content of your questions was going to get me to where I needed to go.
Yeah, there's no way out. I try not to it's interesting. Like I want to make it challenging and useful, but not torture you. And it's a fine line. And that's what I'm trying to walk. And that's, tip my cap to you for showing up and being ready to do the work. What worked for you in terms of your overall schedule? Like where did you study? How did you study? Were you at work? Were you at home? How many hours a week did you log? Give us some of the nitty-gritty details.
Yeah, I would say that. So I studied right where I'm sitting right now, at
Okay.
my little home office is what I'll call it. But every night, essentially, get home from work, do some sort of exercise, and then lock into the program. I would say probably a minimum of an hour to an hour and a half. Potentially 2 hours if it's a weekend, but I was doing that like very consistently. There wasn't a I would give myself a break when I basically sounds kind of crazy, but I would give myself the day off when I couldn't remember the last time that I really gave myself the day off. And like I
Hmm.
said, you know, I wasn't like that the first time. It took a long time to get to the point where I'm essentially a student again, and I have the, mental bandwidth to do this. And so I was really consistent with knocking out problems. The way about actually executing the problems was also so much different for me on the second time around than the first. I had remember going through my packet of problems that I'd done on the first try, and I had just scratched, basically all over the paper, not very organized. Like I said, there was some type of organization and like trust in the program and overall feel that I just wasn't doing on the first try. And the second try, immediately starting your course, each page had its own question, and anything that I would always, simply pause your video, try it on my own from the very get go, execute the problem, right or wrong. I would then follow up in a red pen to then mark up exactly what either, even if it was good, I'd give myself a little boom exclamation, or if I was way off, I would really analyze where did I go wrong in the process. And sometimes it's just a calculation miscue, and man, those are the most frustrating things in the world. But hey, going into that nitty gritty detail per question, I think was extremely helpful. And I would probably knock out maybe 3 to 5 questions per night, but it took me that long to get through those questions because I know that you like to say, squeezing the juice out of the practice problems. And, frankly, I couldn't agree more. I took my time with every single problem, really tried to make sure I understood the concept. Because, when it comes to exam day, there's not going to be an exact problem that you have gone through on your exam or in your questions that are, a copy and paste of what's in the exam.
Yeah.
All of the learning is, a sponge along the way. So I just totally different way of going about it. I felt like, and I felt a lot more confident going into the second one. Luckily, I passed. However, I was still, even after that exam, I knew I had done better. The second half, I felt like, I had really, kind of knocked out of the park. But I was still mentally preparing, hey, if this has got to go a third round,
Mm.
I'm ready. I had, seriously, I had made the next day, I had made a sheet of the things that I remember, that kind of tricked me up on the exam. And I have a list, of the things that I had gone through on that second exam that, I wanted to, if I had to do it again, I was ready to take that battle. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
very different approach, but in the nitty gritty of the day to day, yeah, I was spending, one and a half, I would say consistently every night after work, probably starting around, 7. And that would basically wrap up my day.
That's perfect. I mean, that's textbook execution right there. I mean, the timing, the quantity, even taking the occasional break and trusting yourself to know that it's okay to do that. You're going to do that from time to time. I mean, it's spot on, and really get a sense of your resilience. And kind of coming back to our sports analogy, between the first and second exam, you raised the standard for yourself. It was a different approach that you had, and you were still prepared to go further if it required a third attempt. You can imagine a marathoner or a weightlifter or anyone having a personal record, doing something better than they've ever done it before, and turning around and looking at that and saying, okay, what opportunities are there to learn? How could I make that even better? Now, obviously, PE is binary. It's pass or fail. You don't have to take it again. You don't have to get 100 on it. But we're never going to know it all. And all that the PE is saying that we've achieved the minimum level of competency to be considered a professional engineer. Nothing more, nothing less. Are there people out there that are smarter? Probably yes, but it's in specific domains because you can develop an expertise within the realm, like thermal fluid systems, even though it's a sub-discipline of mechanical engineering, it's still a broad area. And within that, you could have one area of expertise that you become an expert on, or you could be a generalist. There's lots of professional engineers that have project management or contracting roles, or kind of like the things that we do every day may or may not even be that technical.
Mhm.
So yeah, it really just has to do with how far are you going to raise your standard from where it is. And in an ideal world, everyone would figure out what the right bar is in the first place. And the perfectionists out there that are hearing this might take it a little too far and say, I've got to be, I've got to be at the ultimate highest level. I've got to be perfect. And
Mhm.
that's a mistake in the other direction, because now you're going to torture yourself with every problem. And it's just going to become a really hard burn to show up and study every day,
Yeah.
because it's so discouraging. So how do we find that line? How do we calibrate that? It's one of the hardest things to do. And that part is kind of an art. But you figured it out. You learned so much from the first one about how to do it, and then
Mhm.
you applied that in the second effort.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly.
So you mentioned a little bit about your exam day, but how did you feel? How did the morning go? How did the afternoon go? How are you walking out of there? What was
Even
going through your
even
mind?
yeah, even that was different. Like I said originally, I only had a few options, and so it was about a 40-minute drive for me. It started at 11 a.m., which was a little bit odd.
That is later than I would have expected.
It was just a different. I was pretty exhausted, by the time it was, 5. Walked out of there not feeling very confident. Frankly, I just didn't feel very confident. The second time I changed, basically where it was. It was much closer location. I had locked in the date essentially, 2 weeks after getting the notice that I had failed the first time. I locked in the date, locked in the location, went to the exam, feeling pretty confident, knowing that I knew what I needed to know for this exam. I felt confident. Of course, there were things that came along the way that, like, oh, I don't know what to do here, but felt walking out of the exam more confident. Yeah, I would say it's just a totally different experience.
That's awesome. And how about the time? Did you use the whole time the second time as well?
Yeah, the first time I had used essentially every single last minute. I also used almost every single last minute on the second exam. However, I felt more comfortable taking more time on the first portion. Uh,
Mm,
and I also, on the second half, felt comfortable going back to the ones that I had flagged and really taking some time. I think I had about, 25, 30 minutes left, and I was essentially done with the exam. But like, I'm here, I paid for the exam. I want to make this right, right? So
right.
I spent a lot of extra time on the few that I had flagged that second time. So I essentially used the same 8 hours both times, but still just felt different.
Yeah, yeah. Being able to go back and spend extra time on a flagged problem, even if you didn't know what it was, you kind of had to guess and you're not thrilled about it. But hey, if you can have a think and maybe make some practical judgments and knock out a choice, that ups your percentage. And if you can knock out two choices, then you're a coin flip, and that's not so bad. So just little things like that that you can do in the last half hour. If someone's in a position where they've flagged half the problems, then it's not looking good. But if you've got 5 problems, 7 problems that you flagged, then you're going to get a couple of those right. So if you're close, then that could be the difference.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it sounds like you made really good use of the time. And then after that, you go back a week and you play the waiting game. And how did you find out? I guess you were checking email and you got the good news.
I was nervous, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I had taken it on a Tuesday and it was the following Wednesday, so 8 days. But just by research, I had assumed that was the date that I was gonna get my notice from NC's. Woke up, checked my email, saw that there was a notification, so I was like, okay, here we go. Went to the laptop, just, you know, finally saw the past, blinked my eyes a little bit, made sure my contacts weren't blurry. And yeah, just, really just so much time and energy has gone into it for me. And for me, it really is such a personal goal. It felt, you know, almost, like emotional. It felt like, it's not just, hey, I'm just going to get the promotion at work. This is why I did it. It's, man, I put so much time and energy into this and it's finally done. You finally did it. You said what you were going to do. And so, yeah, just a lot of deep breaths and, told my family, told the people that had, known this was a goal of mine, called several people. But yeah, I mean, great, obviously, amazing feeling. And then it was a pretty quick turnaround to get the license, the actual number. Um, I think I think 10 days ago. Yep, 10 days ago is when I got my official PE license number registered for the state of Washington. So
Nice.
so yeah, I mean,
That's one of the benefits of being in a state where the application is up front because all they're waiting for is your passing PE exam result. And as soon as they have it, they can process everything else.
yeah,
So,
exactly.
so it's like official pretty quickly.
Yeah, all done. Got my number. Felt great. Feels great.
And now you get a lot of time back too, which is pretty nice.
Man, I told someone recently, I was, what was I doing before? It's like, the time where before I had started, the PE a year ago. Yeah, what was I doing in the afternoons, right? So it's like all of a sudden I have this extra time in the afternoons. I can, like I said, it's honestly kind of onto the next big goal for me. That's just how I have to, that's how I have to work. It's kind of how I have to function. But yeah, no longer just sitting at my desk trying to knock through, pump power and everything else. So yeah, yeah,
That's great. Well, congratulations. What else are you, you said it's not necessarily going to lead to a specific promotion at work. I'm sure it'll open doors in the future, but more than anything else, it's something that you have, that you'll have forever. So,
yeah. I mean, like I said, it's not like some folks get a automatic promotion, and that's just not the case for me, and that's okay. It's I'm still fairly early in my career. Of course, it'll open doors internally. It's and but like I've said, it's almost not even about like the license. It's about just getting what I said I was going to do done, and that's what made it such a unique process for me. And like I had said earlier, there's not a lot of people, I was talking, not any engineers I was talking to about this because I don't necessarily work with a lot of engineers, and it was something that kind of working on my own time, but
yeah.
I'm happy it's done, and I would, suggest, like I had said earlier, if you focus on something in parallel with the PE, and I would suggest it being some type of physical activity, and get your 10 pull-ups or whatever it happens to be,
Hmm.
it of course has the, mental benefit of simply exercising, releasing endorphins, but also just the back and forth of being able to say, hey, I did this physically challenging thing. Let's go knock out this really mentally challenging problem. And yeah, I think that like I said, it was such a different experience for me the second time. But yeah, I'm happy it's over. I'm happy I have more time, and I'm glad that I passed.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love that advice too about having a physical goal. I'm thinking back to when I did it. I was getting up at 5:30 in the morning and swimming, and I'm not a swimmer, not a good one anyway. I literally like took swim lessons in my late 20s to do long course triathlon. And there's nothing worse in the morning than getting in a cold pool like that, just jumping in the first time. But then I get to work at 7:30, 8 o'clock, and it's like I did something hard this morning. So now, whatever I have to do in the office, whether it's have a difficult conversation with a colleague or a contractor or a consultant that, maybe we're dealing with some kind of a challenge, or, talk to a manager about making some request, or just whatever's going to come up in the context of my day. And then at the end of the day, studying all of the challenges that we've been discussing here, those things are going to happen in the course of a day, but they're going to feel comparatively easy because right away in the morning I did something hard. And I don't necessarily do that every day. I'm not like a cold plunge guy, but like I get inspired when I hear stuff like that.
Yeah,
And your story really resonates.
yeah,
I think the one of the recent episode I recorded with someone, they were mentioning some David Goggins quotes, and I was like, I was listening to that stuff while I was on runs because it
yeah,
just was such an intense period of time. And I really get the sense talking to you, like how you talked about kind of having a big goal and then going to another one, and that's just how it's going to be for you. I think that resonates with a lot of guys, especially guys. Not that women can't have the same experience too, but it's just a really common kind of way of going through things. And I enjoyed hearing about it, and I know it's going to connect with a lot of people listening.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you've already knocked out your workout, you've already done the hardest thing you're going to do today. I totally resonate with that.
Yeah. So what one piece of advice would you leave for anyone listening that's thinking about following your path? Is there anything that that you think stands out that you wanted to take away?
Yeah, outside of I had the physical challenge, in conjunction with your PE, I would say, if you're kind of in my boat where, you're looking, I was looking for, for a podcast, I was looking for something that, had some type of extra, character or flavor to what was, I was trying to about to learn. And I found your podcast, and I felt in my gut that, the way that you taught things and the way you talked about things was the right move for me. And I feel like anybody listening to this might just be in the exact same boat. So trust your gut and go with Dan. That's what that's
Oh,
all
thank you. I
I'll
app-
say.
I appreciate the vote of confidence, and like I said, I tip my cap to you for showing up and doing the work. I can get you halfway there, but you got to work really hard on the other half, and you
Yep,
did that. So,
agreed.
congratulations, and looking forward to hearing about the rest of your career. Keep in touch.
Thank you very much, Dan. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Mechanical PE Exam Prep Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a review to help other engineers find the podcast. And if you're looking for a program that will help you pass the PE exam, check out the full access bundle available at mechanicalpeexamprep.com, and feel free to reach out with any questions. I would be honored to be your guide on the journey to becoming a professional engineer.